In this video, we're going to talk about one of the most important factors for precision rifle reloading, that's shoulder bump. I'm going to talk a little bit about cartridge headspace, we'll talk about optimal bump factors, we'll cover some of the key considerations and challenges, and then do a demo. Hey guys, Gavin Gear here from UltimateReloader.com. I was loading some 6-Dasher here with my short action customs collection of equipment, and I thought, I want to make one video that really concisely talks about shoulder bump, right? You want that just perfect amount of clearance in the chamber for your rounds to chamber reliably, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to achieve than you might think. Let's start with goals. So I outlined the top 4 goals I have when I'm thinking about shoulder bump. The first is to optimize function. You want to make sure that your rounds are going to chamber reliably. If your cartridge is too long and your chamber is too short in a relative sense, it won't chamber. The second factor is precision. We want to make sure that we have consistent shoulder bump, consistent clearance, and if we're able to do that, and if the cartridge is aligned perfectly in the chamber but not too tight, we're going to see better shots on target as well. So it's the precision of the actual shoulder bump process and the corresponding effect that that has on the precision of the groups that we shoot. Then there's longevity. If we're overworking brass, we're going to shorten the life of that brass. And so it's important to bump the shoulder enough to have reliable functioning, but not so much that we're working the brass excessively hard, right? And then finally, optimizing workflow. We want to get to the optimal shoulder bump quickly and have an elegant process of setting up our equipment. So let's talk about headspace. This is really the critical factor here. Cartridge headspace is going to refer to from the end of the case to a magic datum line here on the shoulder. We can't use the start or the end of the shoulder because there's a curvature and it's not a uniform surface in the chamber or on the cartridge. So what we do is we take a gauge that has a hole in it of a particular diameter, and that's going to sit at a particular reference point here on the shoulder. And from the base of the cartridge, the base of the case rim there, to that datum line is going to need to be a very specific length in order for our cartridge to chamber reliably. So what I've got here is I've got a SAMI diagram, and this is for 7mm PRC. On the top we can see the cartridge, and on the bottom we can see the chamber. The chamber has the same relative headspace value. It's going to be from the breech face to that same diameter datum line in the corresponding area of the chamber. What's interesting here is for 7mm PRC, we have a cartridge headspace value based to the datum line on the case itself of 1.897 inches to 1.904 inches. So there's 7/1000ths of an inch range there. That's quite a bit. And then for the chamber headspace, we have 1.900 inches to 1.910 inches, a total of 10/1000ths, right? And so realistically, what we want to do is we want to take minimum chamber spec value, and we actually want our shoulder on our cartridge to be slightly less than that so that it fits, but without excessive clearance. You'll also note here that the maximum cartridge headspace, 1.904 inches, is greater than the minimum chamber headspace, and that means there is definitely the possibility of your ammunition being too long and your chamber being too short, and both of those respective values being within their tolerance range. I'm going to talk to Sammy about this and talk with more people in the industry. This is an issue. There's potential incompatibility there. In reality, manufacturers of rifles and manufacturers of ammunition make sure that that's not the case. And so when I chamber a rifle, I typically chamber it to the minimum chamber headspace value plus 0.002 of an inch. So if you take your chamber minus your cartridge, that's your clearance. And the clearance value needs, again, to be relatively minimal, but it needs to be something so that you can easily chamber and drop the bolt on your rifle. So clearance that you end up with is essentially going to be equal to your bump. Now there's a little bit of a spring back factor there on the brass, but more or less they're equivalent. So when we think about optimal shoulder bump while reloading, there's really 2 different categories in terms of what those optimal values are going to be. For bolt action applications, we really only need to push that shoulder back about 1/1000th of an inch, maybe 2. For semi-auto rifles, in order for those rounds to chamber and for the bolt to close with the semi-auto mechanism, really 2, maybe up to 4/1000ths of an inch is going to be the optimal bump value. And that's pretty much equivalent to the clearance that you'll have between the shoulder on your cartridge and the shoulder area in the chamber. So before we get to the demo, I want to talk about some important considerations. I'll call these success factors. The first is you really want to anneal your brass. So I just set up the AMP Mark II DB for 6 Dasher. It was really easy. I screwed in the number 52 pilot. I hit analyze. It figured out the correct code. I went ahead and used that code. Really easy to get through a whole bunch of cases and get things set up real fast. And this is an induction annealer. It's very precisely computer controlled, and it's going to give you optimal hardness along this sort of shoulder part of the body and definitely the neck area. And what it does is it takes out the work hardening that happens when you're sizing. The net translation is when we bump that shoulder, it's going to bump very consistently and it's not going to spring back. So that's going to help us a lot when we think about bump, when we set it up, and it's also going to allow the brass to last longer. Okay, so the correctness formula, and I have a series of videos that I did related to 308. You're going to want to see our high pressure project and the corresponding reloading and longevity tests that we did. You need correct brass dimensions, you need correct rifle chamber dimensions, and then you also need correct sizing die dimensions, and also for that die to be set up correctly, right? We want everything to fit. We don't want excessive clearance. One of our videos in this series was about avoiding the dreaded clicker, right? And that's when those dimensions don't agree, and also potentially when you have lower quality brass, you're going to run into issues. If you follow this correctness formula, and by that I mean buy a really good rifle, buy good brass and buy good dies and set them up correctly, you're going to avoid a lot of problems. Okay, so I say it's time for a demo, and before we get into the specifics on that, I want to cover the Short Action Customs gear that we're going to use in this video. In fact, we've got dedicated videos on every category of gear here, which is really awesome. If you want the full details, go and watch those. So yeah, the Nexus Press, we've got the comparator set. So we've got a bullet comparator. These inserts just snap right in. We've got the headspace comparator, and then the modular funnel kit from Short Action Customs has these extensions, and they use the same exact inserts that you use for the bullet and headspace comparators. You use the headspace comparator. It fits right over the shoulder and neck area. The powder doesn't spill. It's really great. Okay, so we're going to use the bullet and headspace comparators on the digital calipers. In this video, we're talking about bump. In the next video, which will accompany this series, we're going to talk about bullet seating depth. Okay, and correspondingly, we have dies. We have the modular sizing die, full video on that, available separately here on Ultimate Reloader, and we have the seating die, which is another configurable die system. Okay, so that's the Short Action Customs gear. Next, let's set up our sizer die. Okay, so I've already installed our 308 case rim shell holder in the press. I've installed these lock rings. These are the Short Action Custom lock rings that were originally for the coax. They work really great on the Nexus Press. And we've got the die here. What I did was I screwed this down and then I backed it off a bit. Because remember, with the Nexus, we have a little bit of extra throw available on our sizer die. So it is possible to oversize from the get-go if you go all the way down and touch the shell holder. So we're backed off a little bit there. I've already annealed and lubricated these cases. Now, for this first case, I have this kind of set aside here. What we're going to do is we're going to decap. I'm going to put my catch bucket in the appropriate place here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down until I decap, but I'm not going to actually bump the shoulder on this first one. And the reason is when we take our measurement for our bump with our calipers, to see how easy this is, we'll just lock this in place and then put the case in. We don't want a cratered primer to give us an artificially long measurement, which will happen if you don't decap when you're just using the jaw of the calipers here. Okay, so here's our case. We're going to very carefully spin it while applying just a little bit of force inward that way, zero it out, and then what I always like to do is take it and reinsert it and give it that little bit of a spin to make sure that it comes back up to the 0 point. Okay, so that is where we started from. That is the fire-formed headspace length, and we're treating that as 0. So our bump value will be a negative number in thousandths of an inch. Let's see where we're at from the get-go here. Okay, so it says negative 1/2 of a thousandth of an inch, and that means I need to go just a little bit more. My back off was actually a pretty good guess, it looks like, so I'm going to loosen the lock nut here, the cross bolt on this SAC lock ring, crank it down just a little bit. I'm looking between 1 and 1.5 thousandths. That's kind of my ideal value that I'm looking for. Put a little bit more lube on here. And we're going to get a slightly different number on this first case because we're working it multiple times. But because we've annealed on the amp Mark II DB, that's going to help us have less spring back. Oh, look at that, negative 1.5. So I'm going to call that a good starting point. Now let's size 5 of these, and we're going to see two things: what our value is at, and then also how consistent that number is. So we've got our test piece of brass that we cycled multiple times, and then we've got the 5 pieces that went through the press in a traditional sizing fashion, 1 stroke of the press. And those are the ones that we're going to want to check here, right? This is really just a validation of our setup to see where our bump is at, negative 1.5, and how consistent it is as well. Negative 1.5, negative 1.5, negative 2, where it settled. If we're within about a 1/2 thousandth of an inch, I'm good with that. Negative 2 and negative 2. Great. All pieces of brass were within a 1/2 thousandth of an inch. That's a great setup. So as you can see, shoulder bump is not a great mystery. You just need to pay careful attention to details, and it definitely helps to use the proper tools like the amp annealer, these comparators from Short Action Customs, and this press. One thing I should mention about the press, and you'll see this in the full video if you do watch it, is the way that this press cams over helps for you to have extreme consistency because it goes to the same point every time, the die downward. And then also there's these cam over pucks here, and we're able to get a little bit more die movement because of the way that the press was designed in terms of clearances and dimensions. And I like that because headspace in your rifle can vary quite a bit, and depending on how that varies, to just bottom out the bottom of a die on a shell plate is really not the way to go because it doesn't really give you many options in terms of adjusting that headspace value in a consistent way. And don't forget, in the next video, we're going to talk about bullet seating. Same kind of thing. We'll talk about the sort of conceptual side of it, and we'll do a demo with this same equipment setup. Here's what I'd like to know is, how do you bump your shoulders? Do you go 1 to 2 thou for a bolt action and 2 to 4 for a semi-auto? Are there any particular tools that you like using or any tricks that I didn't cover here? Drop a comment and we'll start that discussion. That concludes this video, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, where we've got unrestricted content, and Instagram. Make sure to follow us on all those channels. Ultimate Reloader also has a commercial solutions division serving law enforcement, the military, and the gun industry. We have some unique capabilities, including a comprehensive suite of recoil testing and evaluation capabilities, trigger profiling, and more. If you're interested in custom rifles like what we build here on the channel or gunsmithing services, you're going to want to go to rifles.ultimatereloader.com and get on the wait list. If you want to learn lucrative gunsmithing like what I show here on the channel, including building custom rifles and Cerakote plus a whole bunch more, you're going to want to check out the Colorado School of Trades, schooloftrades.edu. Thanks again for watching.